In this video, I'm going to show you how to draft a fitted bodice block to fit you perfectly, just like what I'm wearing. I'm Ali and I've been dressmaking and pattern cutting since the early 90s. And for me, the bodice block is one of the absolute essentials that you need to do at the beginning. One of my very first videos I made was drafting the bodice block. I made it a while ago and I have improved my teaching skills, I think, since then, and I've had many questions and lovely comments on that video. I thought it was time to remake it with even more detail, more explanation, and now that I know what kind of fit issues people have, I've had many questions from ladies with big busts who struggle to get the fit right, so I have included things specifically for that body shape, and I've given a lot more explanation as to why I'm doing what I'm doing along the way. The fitted bodice block, if you can get it fitting you perfectly, will save you so much time in the long run. You won't need to do adjustments every time you make a pattern for something. You can work from this. So you'll take the block that you've drafted up to fit yourself perfectly, even if it takes a few attempts to get it right. It's well worth the effort. So once you have your block, you can play around with these darts, you can shape things however you like, but you know that whatever you draft from this block is going to fit you perfectly. There are various ways of making the bodice block. There are various ways of calculating different things and drawing it up. But having looked at many ways over the years and working with many clients of all different shapes and sizes, this is the way that I feel works the best and is also the easiest. The one thing I always want to make sure on my channel is that everything is done easily for people who haven't done this before and might be completely new to dressmaking. And I have to assume as well that a lot of people aren't fans of maths. So I have done this with as little maths as possible. And every time I do anything, I show you what I'm doing on the calculator and what I'm measuring. So I've made it hopefully as easy to follow as possible. So just quickly to show you, I've pinned it up the front because it's just easier to put on. You don't need to do that. And it has a dart that goes from the side of the neck down to the bust point and then into the waist. And then at the back, the dart goes from the waist up to the armhole height, and then on the back it has a little dart here on the shoulder. I don't know if I'm pointing to the right place at all. Now, as much as I try to think of everything, there's gonna be something that I haven't included in this video. So if there's anything you need to know or anything that isn't clear, please make sure you comment below and I will definitely get back to you with the answers to your questions. So enough of the intro, let's get started taking some measurements so that we can get on and start drafting up this block. So let's now get on with the measurements. So just make sure you're wearing the right underwear. You don't want to be wearing something different to what you're likely to wear with anything you make from your block, and just wear something that's not bulky, but not kind of squeezing you in either. So let's go through the measurements one at a time. So you're going to need your waist measurement. So just measure it at the smallest part. Don't pull it too tight. You just want it so it just kind of moves a little bit. And then you want your bust measurement at the fullest part, so just make sure the tape measure, I can't see myself in the mirror, so hopefully I'm doing this right. You want it just to stay level all the way around and measure your bust at the fullest part. Then you need to take your neck measurement. This one's always a little bit tricky because what you don't want to do, you don't want to measure it literally around your neck like this because you don't want to be choked by your block. The block, if you're not sure, just rewind back to when you saw me wearing it, but the neck sits kind of similar to where this t-shirt is. I think, again, I can't see myself in the mirror, but I think it's kind of similar. So you just want to put your tape measure kind of around where you would want that to sit. So mine measures 38 centimeters, and I think that is kind of average. I guess I'm around like a medium. So it's going to be around that, maybe slightly smaller if you're petite, maybe a little bit bigger if you are a little bit bigger than me. So that is your neck measurement. You can always tweak that once you get your sample on. So don't worry too much about that. You're not having to rely on that neck measurement for anything other than getting the neck right. And then once you've done the neck, think about where that tape measure was, and you want to measure your shoulder. So basically from where the neck edge of your bodice block is going to be to where you want the armhole opening to be. It's the exact measurement that you're going to make it. I won't be adding any ease in or doing anything with it. Mine is 12.5. I am really narrow across the shoulder, so it's likely yours won't be smaller than that. It is quite likely it could be wider. Then you need to measure across here. So that's the chest measurement, or it's also called across front. And the position of it is kind of just above the fullest part of the bust. So where you can then feel your rib cage, where you don't have the fullness of your bust any longer, but you don't want to be going right up into your shoulder. So on your bodice, this will be from armhole to armhole, basically, across the chest. So think about where your arms move forward, and where that point is there is where you want to measure. You can always cut this out a little bit more after, but just measure across the front there. So mine measures 34 centimetres. Again, I'm quite narrow across here, so yours might be a little bit wider, but likely not much smaller. So that is on the front, and then you need to do exactly the same on your back. You need to measure across here, but that's going to be really tricky if you're measuring on yourself. It needs to go where the armhole opening is on the back from side to side. If you've got someone to measure it for you, then great. If not, what I tend to do is I add 2 centimetres onto my front measurement, and it's not far off. You can always cut that out a little bit more or fill it in a little bit more if it's not quite right. If you can get the tape measure at the back and look in the mirror and see you're doing it right, then fantastic, but it's not the easiest thing to do. To make sure your darts go to exactly the right place, because anything you do from this block is all going to pivot around the bust point. So you want those darts in exactly the right place. You can do a bit of an approximation, which I'll show you when I make the pattern, but if you can get it perfect, then that is great. So you basically need to measure from point to point or nipple to nipple and take that exact measurement there. That's something that you can tweak once you have your sample on if it's not exactly right. So I've literally tied this around my waist, so I have a point that I can measure from. You don't have to use elastic, you can use anything that goes around your waist, but elastic is just a nice easy thing to use. So the same point there that I just measured with the point to point, I want to measure from there down to my waist. This position vertically is something that you can amend fairly easily. You want to get it as obviously as close as possible, but don't worry about getting it to the nearest millimetre if you're struggling. So just take that measurement from there to there. And then you also want a position for your armhole. So some people measure from the neck down to the armhole, but I find this quite a tricky measurement to do on yourself and to get it accurate. But what I tend to do is I measure from the elastic on my waist up to where I want my armhole. So you don't want this really cut out, and you don't want it too high into your armpit. You want it sat kind of covering your bra but not digging in, and you really need to get that as close as you possibly can, because we're going to work out the shoulder slope measurement from that as well. So just take your time getting that measurement right. It's generally a little bit longer than the waist to the bust measurement. And then I've saved the most tricky one till last, and this is really crucial, particularly if you are big busted. You really need to take your time with this. So you need the measurement vertically from your waist up to, this is called the side neck point, or it's also called the high point shoulder. So you need to get the measurement from there to your waist, and you need one for the front and one for the back. So obviously, depending on your bust shaping, these measurements could be fairly different to each other. The bigger busted you are, the more difference there's gonna be. So you can either take both measurements separately, or you can do it in one go. So I like to do this in one go if I'm measuring it on myself. So what I do is I take the tape measure and I put the tape measure on my elastic at the back, and then it has to come up and it has to go past this point here. So this is the same point that you've measured your neck and your shoulder from, and then it needs to come down the front over the bust point where we've just measured, and then go to the elastic at the front. So you're getting the whole amount all the way through. And then what you can do, I can't see in a mirror at the moment, so I'm gonna have to just kind of point. But if you look in the mirror, you can see what that measurement is at that point there where you measured your shoulder and your neck to. Take that measurement, and that's your back, waist to side neck point measurement. And then the remainder is the front. So that you don't move your tape measure, just take that total and take the back off the front. So for example, if your measurement from the back waist to the front, make sure that tape measure stays on the neck. If that's 90 centimetres and you measure 44 centimetres on the back where you've taken that measurement there, you know that the front's going to be 46. You can do a separate measurement on the front if you want, but that just ensures you're getting them both measured to exactly the same place on your neck. If it helps, you can always use a bit of eyeliner or something to draw a little mark in the mirror where you want to measure that to. One thing on my videos is I always want to make sure that it works for everyone, and everyone's body shape is totally different. We all have different proportions, between our shoulders and our bust and our arm size, and everything has to work together. So the trickiest bit of getting your bodice block right is getting this shaping here, getting the shoulder slope, the armhole and the top dart all working correctly together, and it's really tricky. So as much as I don't like to use standard measurements, I think the best way that's going to work for everyone is to actually use a standard measurement for the dart width that is based on your bust size. This might need a little bit of adjustment when you come to make up your bodice block sample, and you might need to make it slightly bigger or smaller, or there might be a little bit of gaping at the armhole that needs adjusting, but you do always have to fit this on anyway. So the dart that we draw at the top here, this basically is taking the fullness from your bust and getting it to fit on your shoulder. Some block patterns are drawn with the dart at the side and some into the armhole, but I find that this is a better way of doing it. So you need to know how wide to do that dart. And the fuller your bust is, the wider that dart needs to be. The dart is in relation to the fullness of your bust, but also the waist to side neck point measurement. So you can see it's quite tricky to calculate and it's quite tricky to measure on. So I've decided to use a standard measurement for this dart that's based on bust size. It might need a little bit of tweaking when you come to try your sample on, but this is going to work well for all different sizes, and that's the important thing. So use these standard dart measurements. Pick the one that's closest to your bust size, or you can go in between, but have a look at these, and when it comes to the dart part of the video of drafting up your bodice block, this is the measurement that you need. So just pause it here and make a note of the one that is closest to yours. I'll also put these measurements in the description below. So that's all the measurements we need now for drafting up this block, but I'll just talk through a couple of others that if you want to be even more accurate, you can take. I think you're best using the approximations that I use in the video, as these are quite tricky to do yourself. But if you want to, when you're doing the shoulder slope, I'll show you in a minute how just to divide up your armhole depth measurement, and that gives you the approximation. If you want it exactly, then basically if I put this across here, again, no mirror, so hopefully I'm holding that nice and horizontal. The shoulder slope measurement is this measurement here. So from where the position of your neck is down to where the edge of your shoulder is, it's how much it drops. But as you can imagine, it's not easy to do. You could put a second ruler here and do it, or you could get someone to help, but it's not easy. So that is the shoulder slope, hopefully explained. And again, with the neck, I do an approximation because getting the width right is quite tricky. As you can imagine, you're measuring across, but you've got your neck in the way. Same on the back. You could kind of use something to put a line down from side to side and then measure across at a lower point, but it's lots of fiddling around with bits of tape or ribbons or drawing lines, or I've seen people saying to use masking tape. You can just use the calculation. But that's the neck and the shoulder slope if you want to be a little bit more accurate with your measurements. If you head over to creativebobbin.com, you can print off a list of all the measurements you need with the diagrams of where they are, so you can make a note of them. And then once you've got all those measurements, you're ready to start drafting. So let's get straight on with it. So let's break this down step by step. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in my centre back line. So make sure you've got enough room, obviously, to go all the way across. My bit of paper is way bigger than I need. So that's my centre back line down there. And then again, obviously, make sure you've got enough room vertically for all your measurements. And you just need to draw in your waist position at the bottom. So if you haven't got dot and cross, you just need something to make sure this is a 90-degree angle, or these lines are perpendicular, and you just need to draw that in. So that's the centre back and the waist. Now, once I've done that, I need to work out the total width. So this is the centre back. I need to draw in my centre front. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bust measurement. I'm going to add some ease in. I'm adding in 2.5 centimetres or an inch. I would say for this block, you don't want to be adding any less than 1.5, or it's going to be really tight. If you want more than 5 centimetres of ease, I would do a semi-fitted bodice block. So I would go anywhere between about 1.5 and 5 centimetres, but I think 2.5 is a good one to go with. So you just add that to your bust and divide it by 2. So 50.25 centimetres is what I now need to draw to go all the way from my centre back to my centre front. So that's both bits marked, and now I can just draw this in. So there we go, that's the back and the front. Next, I need to mark in, I call it the side neckline. More often than not, the front is going to be longer vertically than the back because it allows room for the bust. So this all depends how busty you are. So you just need to take the measurement you took on your body for your back side neck point to waist and add 0.5 centimetre on, and that just gives you a little bit of ease. You don't want, most of these measurements, you want a little bit of ease. You don't want them exactly as you measured on your body. So for me, I measured 44 centimetres, so I've added on 0.5, and that's 44.5 centimetres, and that's the point there for the back. So I'm going to just mark it in a couple of places, and then I can just join these. And I would normally do this fairly light, but I'm drawing everything nice and heavy so you can see it. So if your front side neck point to waist measurement is the same as the back, you can just continue it all the way along. If the front is shorter than the back, still just continue it all the way along. More often than not, it's going to be slightly longer. So my front measurement is 46 centimetres. So there's a couple of centimetres difference, which I think is probably quite average. And I'm just adding 0.5 centimetre on again. So I've got a little bit of ease vertically when I'm wearing it. So that's my 2 points there for my front neckline, and I'm just going to join those together to roughly the halfway point. So this here is the difference between the back and the front, 2 centimetres, and that's obviously because it needs space for the bust. When you get bigger, you don't just get bigger this way, you get bigger this way as well. That will all become much more apparent when we start doing the shoulder and the dart on the front in a minute. So that's that bit done. And the next bit we need to do is the armhole line going across here. So you can measure from the neck to the armhole, but I find it much easier going up from the waist. So that's exactly what I've done. So the waist to armhole for me was 22 centimetres. I've added 0.5 centimetre ease in from the waist up to the neck. I'm putting 1/2 of that ease above the armhole and 1/2 below. So I need to now add in, oops, what have I done? I need to now add in 1/4 centimetre, so 1/2 of that ease. So 22.25 centimetres gives me my armhole line from the waist. You can measure it from the top if you want, but I just find this a little bit easier to measure on the body, particularly when you don't have anyone to help you. So that's my armhole line now done. This armhole line basically is what it says. It's when you draw your armhole in a minute, it's the lowest point of that. So if you measure it slightly too low, you're going to have quite an open armhole. If you measure it slightly too high, it's going to fit really tight into your armhole. But this is something that's quite easy to amend when you try it on anyway. You want to get it as close as possible, as you are going to use the measurement from here to the top to work out a couple of other measurements in a minute. So get it as close as you can. I'm going to now do some measurements on the back. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to take my back width, which is just a couple of centimetres bigger than my chest, which is an approximation, but it's near enough if you don't have anyone to measure your back for you. So for me, that is 36 centimetres. I am quite narrow, so you're likely to be bigger than that. And I'm going to add on 1 centimetre of ease, and that just gives me that bit more room at the back. And this is obviously 1/2 of my body, so I divide it in 1/2, and that gives me 18.5. So measure in a couple of places. You don't have to measure in a couple of places. You can just draw it parallel to the dot and crosses, but I'm doing this as well for people who don't have dot and cross paper. So that is the width of my back there with a little bit of ease. The next thing I'm going to do is to draw in my back neck. So I just always use 1.5 centimetres for the neck drop at the back. It's such a small measurement that even from a small to a larger size, it's not going to vary much at all. And you can change that when you try it on anyway. So for the neck width, you can measure your neck width on the body, but it's really tricky to do, particularly on yourself. But a good way of getting a pretty close neck width is to take your neck measurement. Mine's 38, which I think is fairly average for a kind of medium size. You need to divide that by 5 and then subtract 0.5 centimetres. So that's a way of working out an approximation. I've had various questions on my other videos asking me how I come to these calculations. A lot of these calculations are just ones people have been using for years, and I've looked at various methods of doing things, and I've just worked out what works most of the time for most sizes that I have worked with. So it is a bit of an approximation, but you can easily change this when you make your sample. So that's the back neck drawn in. The next thing I want to do is I want to draw in my shoulder line. So again, this is really tricky to measure yourself, and if you're not used to measuring, but a really good way of doing an approximation is to measure from this line on the back down to the armhole line. So for me, it is 22.25, and then divide that by 5. And then with this answer, you just need to add on 0.5 centimetres. That is an approximation, but it's kind of close enough. So that is the measurement, 4.95, or 5 centimetres is near enough really, down from there. And I'm going to draw that across. If you do want to actually take the measurement on your body, you just need to measure from one side to the other side of the shoulder and see what the drop is, but it is really tricky. This is near enough to then amend when you try your sample on. I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. So that's the shoulder line there. And now I need to draw in my shoulder. So my actual shoulder measurement is 12.5. So I can measure that from there to there, but I'm going to put a little dart on the back here. It doesn't need to be very big, but it just means it shapes around your shoulder much better. So I'm going to add on 1 centimetre. From this point here, I'm going to measure 13.5 centimetres, which is my shoulder, plus 1 centimetre. And I'm going to draw that line in there. And then I need to find the halfway point of that. So I can either divide that measurement in half and measure from one side, or what I do that's nice and easy, it was 13.5, I just position the 13 just inside, so you've got a little bit either side, because 13 is much easier to divide in half. And then I mark the halfway point. So you just do whatever works for you, and then just line up your ruler with that, and that means you can draw a perpendicular line. If you've got a ruler with grid lines, that's perfect. If you haven't, that works absolutely fine. So this dart is generally around the same size on everybody because it's quite a short dart, but you can always tweak that when you try it on. So it's 5.5 centimetres down and 0.5 centimetre either side of where I've marked that position, and then I just join those to make the back shoulder dart. So that just helps it fit on the back, because you do have a little bit of curve on that back shoulder. So that's that now done. And next I'm going to measure between this line, and I'm going to half that. So just like I did before, it's 17 and 2 millimetres. If I just move it down by a millimetre, the 17 is centred, and I can easily divide that to get 8.5. And then I'm going to just join that point up with there. And that's the beginnings of my shoulder on my back. I'm not going to put my waist shaping in until the end, but I'm going to mark the line where it goes. So I'm just going to take this measurement, so 18.5, so I just need to half that, so 9.25, and I'll just measure that in a couple of places, and I'll just draw a line there down from that armhole line to the waistline, and that's ready to put my shaping in a minute. I now need to do exactly the same as this on the front, but obviously there's a lot more shaping to consider on the front, so it is more tricky, but let's just break it down a bit at a time and I'll make it as easy as I can. So the neck width, sometimes the neck width needs to be a little bit smaller on the front than the back, but I'm actually just going to do it the same, and then that's something that you can tweak when you are doing it if you need to. There are so many variables when you're working on the front that it's kind of impossible to do something that works absolutely 100% for everyone. And all of this is all dependent on whether your body measurements are absolutely perfect, which is hard to do. So you need to get the basics down, and then you need to make a sample and you can tweak it. So the case of having these a couple of millimetres difference, unless you're measuring yourself 100% accurately and you're sewing to the nearest millimetre, a couple of millimetres difference on your pattern isn't going to make a huge difference. This is why I think fitting the sample on you is a big part of the process. So I'm going to take my neck measurement and divide it by 5 like I did before, but instead of taking half off, I'm going to add 1 on, and that gives me the front neck drop. So you might not want to go down as low as that, but I don't like necks that choke me. So I'm just going to draw that in there, and then I'm just going to draw my neck shape in there. You can either just do that by eye, or you can use a pattern master if you've got one. So that's the neck drawn in. That was the easy bit. Next, I'm going to start drawing the rest in. So the dart width, the length of the dart, all of this really comes down to your shape. It's a case of if you are a smaller size or a larger size, but also the proportion of your bust compared to your shoulder. So let's just do it a step at a time. So nice and easy, just measure from the neck down to the armhole line. So for me, that is 15.6. and just divide that by 3, and that gives me 5.2. So I'm going to measure 5.2 up from here, and I would normally draw this very light, but I'll draw it a bit heavier so you can see it. So just mark that line for now, and then you need a width point. So what I'm going to do firstly, I'm going to take my chest measurement and I'm going to add on my dart measurement, and then because this is half, I'm just going to divide that by 2. So 21.25 centimetres. Hopefully this is nice and clear. I'm trying to go nice and slowly so I can cover as much detail as possible, because hopefully I'm answering a lot of your questions as we go. So centre front across 21.25 centimetres, where I've drawn that line across. And that is the point there, and I'm just going to square down onto this line as well. So that is the kind of front width. This is where your armhole's going to go. This is where your arm moves around. And at this stage here, what I'm going to do is from the back to the front, I'm going to measure that and I'm going to half it. So that's 10.5 centimetres, so 5.25. So I'm just going to measure from the centre back to this point here, which is 23.75 or 23.75. I'm going to measure that at the bottom, and I'll just draw that in, and that is my side seam ready to do my waist shaping in a bit. So now I've got that, I can draw in the bottom bit of my armhole. So I'm just going to do this by eye because I'm used to doing it. So the back, you want that kind of shape. The front, you want that cut out quite a bit, because obviously you move your arms to the front a lot more than you move them to the back, and you want plenty of room for that. But this is something that you can really easily play around with when you try your sample on. So just to give you an example, if I measure up from this point here, that measures 1.7, and on the back it measures about 2.5. But just play around with that. You want it to look roughly this shape. That could maybe go up a little bit there. I've maybe cut that out slightly too much. So let's just redraw this in. This is why I usually draw quite lightly. I'm drawing much heavier than I would normally so that you can see it. So let's measure that again. So 1.8, it's only moved by a millimetre. I think I said 1.7 before. So that's most of the armhole done. So the last bit now is to get the front dart put in, and then the shoulder, and then we'll finish off this armhole. And then we've just got the waist shaping to go. So it's getting there now. It's not the easiest thing to do, but hopefully breaking it down like this, it's a lot easier than you thought it might be. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing in my dart. So you took a measurement from your waist to your bust point, so we need to measure that upwards. So for me that was 19 centimetres, and I'm going to add on 0.25 centimetres ease, exactly the same as what I did for the armhole line. So that gives me 19.25, and I'm going to measure that up from the bottom. And again, I'd normally do it lightly, but let's make it nice and clear. And it's going to be around here somewhere, so we just need to draw a little line there. Then the next measurement is the point-to-point measurement, so from nipple to nipple. So for me, that was 19.5. I am going to add on 0.5 centimetre ease. Oops. Let's do that again. So I add on 0.5 centimetre ease to give me 20, and then divide it by 2. So 10 centimetres is what I need from the centre front line across to where my bust point is. And this is where all the darts for the front shaping come from. So you can do an approximation. You can just half this measurement. Let's just see what that would have been. So it would have been slightly further to the left. And this depends so much on your shaping. Some bust points are wider, some are closer together. A lot of it depends what underwear you're wearing. And I hate to say it, things like this depend on age as well. I'm pretty sure this bust point for me would have been slightly higher a few years back. So get that drawn in by using those 2 measurements, and that's where all of your darts, doesn't matter where they're going, they all pivot around that point. And that's a crucial one to make sure it's in the right place when you make up your sample. So I'm now going to join the bust point to my side neck point up here. And that's the right side of my dart. So we don't have much left to do now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the dart width here across. So 8.5 centimetres, and that's my dart width. I'm not going to just draw that straight in. I need it to be the same length as this one. So even though we've got a measurement from here to here, that's nice and easy, we need to measure on the diagonal, because the bigger your dart is, the more that's going to vary. So that measures 27.4 for me. So I need to make sure this is exactly the same. So if I measure that, it's actually 27.6. So I'm going to just come down 2 millimetres. So this here is now the top of my dart. So you can see if I'd have just carried on across, it would have been slightly longer and it wouldn't have matched up perfectly. But I've just drawn it down slightly. So that's where I now need to draw my shoulder from. But where do I draw it to? I don't have a line to draw it to. So I'm now going to just stick to a real standard measurement of 1.5 lower than the back. So it is an approximation, but this, when we're looking at the shoulder slope, is something that we can correct if we need to. So where your back shoulder line is here, just measure down 1.5 centimetres and draw a new line. Again, just do it quite faint. And now I can draw in my shoulder measurement. So unlike the back, I'm not adding anything on. I've already drawn my dart here, so I need the exact measurement. I'm not adding any ease into this. So I need to measure 12.5 centimetres from the dart point that I put there to meet up with this line here. So this looks quite steep, but I'll show you in a second what happens when we close the dart. So I drew this up before I started so I can show you what happens. So this is where my darts all pivot. So this is the first line that I drew in, and this is the new line. So when I close it up, what I'm going to do is this line here, oops, it's going to join onto this when it's sewn up. So I'm going to turn that over. So I'm going to pivot it around here. Hopefully you can see through the paper nice and clearly. And that now lines up. So that's how it looks when it's closed up. And you can see straight away, the shoulder line here is much more similar to the back. So if I measure that, I can draw through here where my neckline was. So that measures 4.8 centimetres and this measures 5 centimetres. So it is very similar once it's closed up. So don't be alarmed if this looks quite exaggerated. While I drew this up, I did do something else as well that I'm going to show you now just to demonstrate. So this is the shape that I've got. It's pretty much what I'm now drawing. And I wanted to show you what happens if your bust is slightly different. So if you have less bust shaping, your vertical height is going to be, let's bring it down here a little bit. Your vertical height is going to be the same as the back. So that would be this position here. And if you have less bust shaping, your dart's also going to be smaller. So this is the width of the dart that you would have. And it still joins up with the same bust point down here. That's not going to change. So you can see already that dart is smaller. And I've drawn the line on here ready to show you, so I don't have to do too much measuring. When I measure my shoulder measurement down to this line, which is the line that I just drew, it meets up in pretty much the same place. Oops, I've just drawn that in the wrong place. Right, let's just rub that out because that's going to confuse matters, isn't it? So let's draw it in the correct place. So that is the shoulder line for the smaller dart. So you can see the angle is a little bit different, but it meets at pretty much the same place. So it gives you the same armhole. And I've also drawn one in for a bigger bust. So if my bust was a couple of centimetres bigger, this is likely where my vertical measurement would take me to. This side of the dart goes up to here, and then the left side of the dart would come here, which would be a little bit wider, so you've got a wider and longer dart. And then again, I've pre-measured this to make it nice and easy to show you. So if I draw from there to where it meets up at the right length, you've got more of an extreme angle, but it still meets the same place. These shoulder lines are all the same length. They all come from different points up here. The bigger the bust shaping is compared to the shoulder and your waist, then the higher you're going to go up here and the wider your dart's going to be, but they always meet up here. So that is hopefully explaining well how that shoulder line works. And then I've just drawn this down here as well, just to show the difference to the width here. So if you're going with a wider dart here, it's going to make the width here when you're drawing in your armhole a little bit wider. So this is the point here where it would be to meet up with the larger size, and this point here is where it'd be for the smaller size. So you can see it just changes that width across there as well. So hopefully that has helped explain all of this. So let's get back on with the pattern and get it finished. We are pretty much done now. So we've added in the width there, we've got the dart width, we've got the position at the top of the dart there, got the shoulder length, and the last bit is just to join this in here. So this is how it should look. I got to the end and I thought there was a bit that I hadn't actually explained while I was doing it. So I'm just going back and just filming this bit. So when we decided on the point for the armhole here, it's lower than at the back. And I just wanted to show why. So this is more cut out here and there's more of an angle here. So you're adding a little bit of length. So if I flip that over, although it's quite a bit lower at that point, I'm just kind of tracing this around, hopefully you can see through what I'm doing. But when you do that, there's actually not much difference. And in fact, this front one is very slightly longer if I've done that accurately. So that just hopefully helps explain why we're drawing this a little bit lower there. It's all to do with how cut out this is. The last bit I'm going to do is add some waist shaping. So you just need to take your bust measurement, the full bust, not the over bust, and subtract your waist measurement, and that gives you the difference. I wouldn't measure your waist too tightly for this. You don't want it too snug. That's obviously the total difference, and this is only half of your body, so divide that in half. So 9 centimeters is what I need to take out of my waist to give me the shaping. So how you take it out all depends on your body shape. First thing I'm going to do is this line here. I'm just going to use the dot and cross to just line that up and draw that in there. So I need to take some from the side seam, some from the back dart, and some from the front dart. So I need to take a bit more out of the front to what I do out of the side and the back. And this is something you can just play around with. But I've worked out in advance what I want to take out of mine, which I think is going to work for my shape. So I'm going to take a total of 2.5 centimeters out of the back dart and of the sides. So that's 1.25 from either side of the lines. So I'm going to mark that first on there. And so let's take, so that's 2.5 for each. So let's subtract 5 off. That's the total of what I've taken off them. And that leaves me with 4. So nice and easy, 2 centimeters off either side at the front. So it's not a massive difference. If you're really busty and you've got a really small waist, then this dart could actually be quite big. So I'm gonna now just draw all of these in. I'm gonna join the front points to that bust point there, because that's where all of our darts go to on the front. I'm gonna join the ones on the side seam to the armhole point there. And then I'm sure you've guessed I'm going to join these up to the top of that dart position that I drew in a minute ago up there. So that's all the shaping done. I've got a lot of lines going on here, so let's just try and neaten that up a little bit so it's nice and clear. Hopefully that's a bit clearer now to see. So I'm going to now make a sample and see how this fits. So I need to cut all this out. I've actually stuck this to the table so it didn't keep moving. So I'm going to cut up the sides here. So that's the front seam and that's the back seam. So this little triangle here, I can get rid of that. I don't need that. I'm not going to cut out the darts. I'm going to just mark these on the fabric when I do it. But I can basically now just cut all around here, around the armhole and the shoulder and the neck and up the centre back, centre front, and take this off of the waist. It's just the darts I don't want to cut out. It was just that one. So I'm going to get this now all cut out. I've got this all now cut out, ready to sew up for my sample. So I'll just go through what I've done. I've done it on the fold on the centre back and I've put a seam allowance on the front. This means it's a lot easier to pin on myself. Don't pin it on the side because once you get your shoulders sewn up, you won't be able to get it over your head. So put a seam allowance on the front for pinning it on, and then I've put a seam allowance on the side as well. These are both 1.5 centimetres. And then on the shoulder, I've done 2.5 centimetres, just because then I've got a little bit of movement when I'm playing around with my shoulder slope when I get it on. I might not even need to do it, but if I do need to, gives me plenty to play with. And then I've also done 2.5 across the top of the dart here as well. Then the neck and the armhole, I've just cut exactly where the pattern is so I can see exactly where they're going to sit on me. The thing with this is it's absolutely crucial to sew everything 100% perfect, because this is the fit that you want to get right so that everything you make from it, you don't have to worry about fitting things. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw on my pattern. If I show you on the front, and then you can just do exactly the same on the back. So I'm going to mark on here where I need to pin it. I don't need to draw it on the other side as well because I'll just match the edges up. But I know now that I have to pin through that line, so that's nice and easy. I don't need to draw on for the side seams because I can line that up on the seam guide on the sewing machine. So the other thing I want to draw rather than mark with pins and notches, just because then I can get it absolutely spot on, is the darts. So I'm going to just mark the top and the bottom. On the top, on this side, it obviously lines up with my neck edge, but I'm going to do a little mark that side because then I got the exact points where I have to sew that up to. And then I'm going to just put a pin through for now at this point here because I can't mark that with a pencil just yet. So that's the main bits I need to sew up there, and I just need to remember that this is 2.5. If you think you might forget, just write them on. Oh, can't write very well on this fabric. So you're not going to forget what those are when you come to sew them, but you don't need to draw the lines on for those. So I've got the marks there, I've got the marks at the bottom, and I've got the pin there. So I'm just going to take these out and oops. And before I take that off, I'm just going to put a little mark there. So I know that's exactly where that bust point is. So I need to transfer these to the other side as well. So I'm just going to do that with pins. You don't have to do it this way, but this is just a nice, easy way to do it. And then you know everything you sew is 100% as the pattern. So that one just needs to mark across there. Going to put a little cross on that one, same here, and then those little marks at the bottom. So that's those all now marked out, and now I'm just going to draw on exactly where everything is going to go. So that's this dart. And then the same at the top. So that's drawn on. So when I come to pin these, I have got the exact place that I need to pin and stitch through. I've just realised that I've said to draw that on there, but actually this is the inside once I start sewing this dart. So you actually need that line on the other side. I can just about see that through there, but just measure over 1.5 centimetres and just draw your line there. So it just means once you've got it on, that's the inside, your dart's sewn up, and you've got this line to pin it through. So I'm just going to do exactly the same on this one, and then I will just do exactly the same on the back. So I'm all drawn up now. I've got front and back on both sides all drawn. I wouldn't normally do this when I'm sewing a garment, but if you're making a sample like this and you're not used to doing it, then I do think it's a good idea to make sure all of your darts are 100% accurate. So by having the lines, I can literally just put my pin through both bits, and I know that's lined up there. If I find the end of my dart, I like to put one going that way just to make sure I stop at exactly the right point, and then you can put it through and just double check when it comes out the other side that it's coming out on the line. Even if it's off by a tiny bit, just wiggle it around and make sure that's perfect. So you just need to do that with all of the darts and then just sew those up. When I sew the back darts, I'm only going as far as where I'm going to be pinning my shoulder seam. I don't want to be sewing this bit here because it's going to carry on going in, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to sew as far as there. When I'm doing the front, when I'm fitting it, I want to make sure this bust point is in exactly the right place. So just to make it really, really obvious, I want to be drawing a line across. So this is going to be on the inside where I've drawn these. So all I'm going to do is put a pin through where that point is there. And so I've got that on the other side. I don't need to do this on both pieces. I just need to do it on one side. And I'm just going to draw a line across like that. And it's just going to make it really easy to see where the bust point is when I put it on. Once all the darts are pinned in place, then I can pin my side seam. So that's the nice easy bit, just from top to bottom on that side seam. And then I'm just going to sew this 1.5 centimeters using the seam guide on the sewing machine when I do it. So that's all the sewing that needs to be done, and I'm gonna pin the shoulders so I can play around with them. So I'm gonna go now and get all of this sewn up. That's all now sewn up. So I've done all the darts, the side seams, this is my line so I can check the bust point nice and easily. And then what I forgot to say to do is just to draw the line where you're going to pin this up here, because if you change any of that, so that's 2.5 centimeters, that's what I added on for my seam allowance. If you change any of that when you come to do your pattern, it just makes it that little bit easier to do the adjustments. So I'm just going to draw that on there. You don't have to do this, just makes it nice and easy. So I'm going to do that on both sides, and I'm going to actually pin it on the outside. So I've pressed all these flat, and these are all on the inside so I can see it nicely. But I'm going to have this pinned on the outside so that when I put it on, it's nice and easy to adjust. That's my shoulders now pinned on. So you can see once it's put together, even though the angles are quite different when you're drawing it, it all matches up. So now it's the moment of truth. I get to try it on. So once it's on, because I've got my line down there, I know that I can pin this together really easily, and I know it's accurate. You don't have to do the line, but obviously when you pin it on, you've only got to get it off by a little bit either side, and it's going to change the fit a lot. If you pin it on a drawn line, you know it's exactly where it's meant to be. So let's get this on now and see how it fits. So this is how my sample looks sewn up. I've not done any adjustments. This is just as it is how I drafted it. So things you want to check is you want to make sure the fit around the bust and the waist are okay. If they're really tight or really loose, then you've either measured a little bit tight or loose, or added too much or too little ease. So look at that first, and you need to look at where the bottom is. You want that being sat exactly where you put the elastic around your waist when you took your measurements. You want that sitting there, and if it's not, then the measurement you took from your waist up to your shoulder might have been a little bit short. Then I would check the armholes. Make sure you can move your arms. So you can see I've already put a pin here. I feel like my armhole needs to be cut out just a little bit more. So when you drew on the shape of the armhole, when you were doing your pattern, that's now going to be really visible once you've got it on, if that's right or not. And all you need to do is just fill it in or cut a bit out accordingly. So that's this pin here, and then the bust point. So the reason I drew the line across is because it's really obvious when you put it on, when you look in the mirror, if that bust point's in the right place. Without that line, I'd have to work out where the point of the darts are, but it's so obvious, and I've put a pin where I want to lower it to. I feel like it's just a tiny little bit too high. Again, when you're taking your measurements from your waist upwards, to pick exactly where that bust point is to the nearest millimetre is hard, but it's very easy to see with this. Just make sure you're wearing the same underwear that you wore when you took your measurements. Obviously, this is what I was saying when making the sample. If you draw the line where to pin, I know that's pinned on perfectly, so this fit is exact. So the hardest bit, which I explained when making the pattern, and I'll explain that now I've got the sample on, is getting it all right on the shoulder and the neck and these darts. There's so many variables. So some people are very narrow shouldered, some people are very broad, some people's busts are big compared to their shoulder, some people's are not, neck shapes change. Everything is completely different, and proportionally we're all very different. So it's hard to do one way of drawing this up flat and having it fit absolutely perfectly. So the shoulder slope here is basically the difference between the side neck point and this bit of the shoulder. And this is really hard to measure, which is why I do the approximation when I'm drafting it up, because chances of you getting that exact measuring it is probably less likely than actually just doing the approximation. But actually that shoulder slope calculation seems to have worked perfectly on me, so it might do on you too, which is fantastic. And then also the neck. This fits really well at the front. I'm really pleased with where the drop is. This is exactly as I've done with the drawing. I've not changed it. Fits really well here, although you'll see at the back, and it probably moves a little bit as I turn around, but it's just a little bit gapy at the back, so I need to get rid of that. So I'll go through that in detail in a minute. But what I am happy with is where the shoulders sit here, where the neck sits here, and the shaping of this dart at the front and all of that at the back. I just need to sort out this neck. So the only way to do it is to kind of play around with it. And this is why I suggested to pin these on the outside rather than sew them or pin them on the inside, because it's really easy now for me to go in the mirror and play around with this and see where I need to adjust it. So this gaping in the neck here, what I don't want to do is put a dart in there. That's not going to be good. And if I take some width out of the back neck here, it's going to go all the way down. So that's not an option either. So I'm going to unpin one side and I'm going to fiddle around with it to see what I need to do. I don't want to move this side because this is perfect. I need to just adjust this. So I'm now going to go and have a little look in the mirror and see what I can do to get that perfect. So I've had a little play around with this in the mirror. I've now rearranged the shoulder a little bit and it's got rid of that gaping on the back neck. So it does come with experience knowing what to do, but hopefully when I show you what I do in a minute to adjust the pattern on this, it will give you a bit of an insight. And for any adjustments you might need to do to the neck and the shoulders, I do have a separate video of more bodice adjustments. I'll put a link in the comments and there is a link above. So I will show you in a second how I did it. But basically what I've done, I've not adjusted the side here. I need to fill in a little bit on the back neck. It was just a bit too cut open. And so that I don't alter the rest of it, I'm going to make my dart a little bit wider and a little bit longer to accommodate that adjustment to the back neck. And this is why I say when you are working out your neck, just dividing it by 5 and taking ½ centimetre off and stuff is quite approximate. But as soon as you get it on, you can see exactly what you need to have done. So I'm going to go now and make all the adjustments to my pattern. I'm going to adjust the bust point, the armhole, and this little bit on the neck, and I'll show you how I did it. And as I said, have a look at my separate video if there are other adjustments that I don't cover. So with main adjustments, other than that, you might want to just add or take a little bit off the bust and waist. That should be quite self-explanatory. As I said before, if it's way off, you might need to just look back at your body measurements, because if it's way off, you might have just measured something incorrectly and it can throw the whole thing off. If you need to add to the length, you want to make sure the bust point's in the right place to know whether to add the length under the bust or above the bust or a little bit of both. But they're all the basic things. Let's now go through what I'm going to do with my back neck and the other bits. Let's now have a look at all those amendments with my sample next to my pattern. So the main thing that you're probably going to have to play around with is the shoulders, as I said, because there's just so much going on with the shoulder slope, the neck size, the darts, everything. So let's do the easy bits first. It was just a little bit tight here, and that's just down to this curve. So if yours is too cut out, you need to fill it in. If it's too tight, just cut a bit out there. So all I need to do is what this measurement is, draw it on here, and then I can just redraw that in. And it's going to have to come in a little bit up here, but it's only minimal. And then I just get it to join that. I don't want it to affect this bit here at all, but it needs to be more cut out there. If you want to get it in exactly the right spot, just lay your pattern over it. So I can see that's that point here, which is here. So that's where that's got to be amended there. Lovely and easy. And then the bust point, even easier. I'm only bringing it down the tiniest little bit, so 0.5 centimetre. So this point here just basically needs to move down by 0.5 centimetre. So you can rub all these lines out and redo it, or just literally mark where that point is, because you've still got the points at the top and the bottom of the darts anyway, but that is essential. So I'm going to put a little arrow to point to that. So the trickier bit, as I said from the beginning, is getting the shoulders right. You've got the shoulder slope to take into account, you've got the neck width, front and back, the neck drop, you've got the darts. There's a lot going on. So I played around with this in the mirror for a while before I started filming myself in it. I knew straight away that the shoulder slope was actually pretty good, so I didn't need to change that. My neck was a little bit gapey, so I want to make my neck a little bit kind of coming in further this way. So I've pinned it on like this. So whereas this was the side of my back neck, it's essentially just moved over a little bit. I've taken a little bit off. So where I've pinned it on through my seam, you can just see it doesn't line up here anymore. There's a bit of back missing, and that's what I'm gonna fill in. So that's essentially making my back narrower. I really hope that makes sense. It's hard to explain. So I don't want it to affect where the armhole is. That fits perfectly. I'm gonna fill the pattern in here a little bit in a second, but it means I've then got too much fabric here because I've shifted this over. So what I've done, where my dart is, you can see I've taken a little bit more out of there. So what I've taken out of there, so I've essentially made the dart bigger, is the same as what I'm doing there. So I need to make this not quite so wide. So I've stuck a little bit of paper on my pattern ready, and I'm just going to extend that line there. And the measurement, if you look at the edge here to where this edge is here, the easiest way to do this is to just put a pin through where the seam line is and measure to that edge there. So that measures 6 millimeters. So I'm going to measure that here, and that's why you have to sew really accurately, because it can make quite a difference. So I'm only adding this tiny little bit on here. I can put some tape over it now. I've drawn it, and that's the only little bit that I need to add on. So you need to just play around with your neck, and you might need to add a bit like that on to the front or the back, or take a bit off, but just see how yours look. I can't really show every single possibility, but it's the same principle for whatever you're doing. So that's now obviously made my shoulder a little bit longer than the front. So you can either ease this on, because it's only 6 millimeters, or you can just make the dart a little bit wider, which is what I'm going to do. So it's 6 millimeters in total. So I'm just going to measure 3 millimeters either side, and I'm just going to make it a bit wider. As I'm making it wider, I'm going to make it slightly longer, because if not, it's going to be quite pointy, which I don't want. So I would normally then rub out the initial one. I just wanted to keep that there so you can see the difference. So I'm just taking that little bit more out, and I think that is because I'm quite round shoulders, which shows that I don't have the best posture. So maybe I need to start doing some yoga or something. So that is now done. So what I've added on there, I've basically taken off of there. What I don't want to do, as I said, is to do any kind of adjustment with this bit here, because this bit fitted perfectly and my slope was good as well, so I don't need to change that. So let's look back at the sample with the pattern. So you can see now what I was trying to explain a minute ago is to change that neck. There's the little sliver that I've added in, and I was trying to explain with the dart how I'd made it bigger, and that's where I made it wide there. And this bit I haven't changed at all, and my slope obviously hasn't been affected on the back or on the front. So there are so many variations of what you might need to do with this shoulder slope that I can't cover everything. But if I now look at this side, all I say is whatever you pin on here is what you need to adjust on there. So if where your pins end up, if you're changing the slope, are further up, you need to add it on. And if they're further down, you need to take it off. And the whole point of drawing this line on here is because that's exactly where this cut line is on here. So what I've done on the back neck, you might need to do on the front neck. You might also need to adjust the drop of the front neck up or down. We've covered the armholes, we've covered the bust point. The waist shaping should be self-explanatory. You can either take these in a little bit more or let them out a little bit. And then obviously just make sure that the waist sits on your waist. So this is why it is so essential to get your measurements done correctly in the first place. So when you put yours on, if it's a few little tweaks like this, then fantastic. It's rare to get it absolutely 100% because there are so many variables. But if it's way off, the first thing is just double check your body measurements. It's quite hard if you've never done it before to know if you're taking them perfectly or not. The vertical ones are absolutely essential for getting everything right this way. Obviously the bust and the waist and across the chest and the back, they are a little bit easier to amend once you've made the sample. So these are all the amendments that I need. I now need just to cut this little bit out of my pattern here. I've already got this bit put on and I've put my little arrow where my bust point is here. Chances of you having exactly the same adjustments as I have are pretty slim, but I've covered a few here, and if there's anything I haven't covered, then take a look at my bodice adjustments video, which will show you a few more. And if I haven't covered it in that video either, then please comment below or on my adjustments video, and I'll know that there are other adjustments that people want to know that I've not yet covered. So you saw the finished block at the beginning, but now that you've seen the video, I wanted to show it again. So I've sewn all the amendments, I've sewn the shoulders up, I've adjusted the darts, all of that. So you can see now that it's fitting well on the front and the back, and I've drawn on my new bust point, I've cut out the armholes. So this is now well fitting and I can use my block now to make whatever I like. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If there's any questions that I haven't already answered, please comment below. I always get back to people, and as you know from this video, this is why I made this video. There were plenty of questions from my previous version, and so I decided to make a new one to cover all those answers to make it even better. So please do comment and then check out my other videos and subscribe if you like my channel.